Hello, friends, and let's get started.
Shit, this is bullshit. Josh set the whiskey glass on the bar and shook his head. Come on, Tom laughed. A mutual friend with whom they sometimes went out for a drink on Fridays. You and Kelly are young. No kids. What have you got to lose? It's a goddamn vacation. You mean you went there? Well, Tom rolled his eyes. I suppose so. Suppose? Okay, I did. And I'll tell you, it's not a place you should go if you're not ready to push your boundaries. Josh grinned and took another sip. He already knew Tom liked to lie. Maybe not lying, but exaggerating. He was the kind of guy who always knew the exclusive places, the members-only places, the places where real magic happens. But to be honest, Josh hadn't cared about such stories for a long time. What's the big deal? Kelly asked suddenly. She was sitting next to him, twirling a glass of white wine, and had only listened to Tom's chatter with a lazy smile until then. Josh felt a slight tenseness. There was no sarcasm or doubt in her voice. More like pure interest. Well, Tom smirked. Let's just say it's an adult resort. Closed. No cameras, no phones, no conventions. 5-star villa, beaches, pools. You can do whatever you want with whomever you want, and no one will judge you. Kelly ran her finger along the rim of her glass. I mean, it's sort of. Tom nodded. Josh frowned. Wait a minute. Are you saying it's some kind of swingers resort? Tom laughed. Well, I wouldn't label it that way. It's a place where people vacation without boundaries. Some people just sunbathe and drink cocktails. Some people have fun. Josh wrinkled his nose, but Kelly continued to stare at Tom studiously. Where's that? An island in the Caribbean. Helicopter pad, its own spa, restaurant with a chef from France. You'll love it. Josh felt a twinge of irritation inside. Us? You really think we're going to go to the damn island? Why not? Kelly said suddenly. Josh turned his head sharply toward her. She continued to slowly swirl her glass around without even looking at him. Are you kidding? No. Why not look? She looked up. It's just a place. It doesn't mean we have to participate in anything. Tom smiled contentedly. Look, you surprised me, Kelly. Usually wives say no way in these cases. Well, maybe I'm different, she shrugged. Josh frowned. He was starting to dislike this conversation. Okay, stop. Are you seriously going to consider this trip? Kelly leaned over to him and touched his arm. Josh, we're not saying we're going to do anything, right? Just a vacation. Exotic. Expensive resort. You want to go to a place where people do what they want to do. And we'll just vacation. Josh thought about it. His wife had never talked about something like this. They were an ordinary couple with an ordinary relationship, albeit a little stale. On the other hand, he knew she'd been complaining a lot lately about boredom, about monotony, about how they lacked fire. But that was weird. I'm not sure I like it, he said finally. Kelly smiled. Just check out the website then. She pulled out her phone and showed him the page. Gleaming beaches, white sand, clear water, elegant villas with pools and jacuzzis. Everything looked immaculate, like an ad for the best resorts in the world. See, she said, it's just a beautiful vacation. Josh looked at her. She looked inspired. Too inspired. He didn't know what worried him more, the island itself or the fact that Kelly had caught on to the idea so quickly. Josh took the phone from her, taking another look at the pictures. Yes, it looked like an expensive vacation, but something about the place was stressing him out. Maybe the idea itself, or the ease with which Kelly had agreed. He wanted to discuss it again, but her eyes glittered with anticipation and her body language said the decision's already been made. That same night, he tossed and turned in bed for a long time, listening to his wife's steady breathing. What if he was really overcomplicating things? What if this was just a vacation, sun, beach, and cocktails? But something was keeping him on his toes. And so, a week later, they were already flying in a helicopter over a vast expanse of water. As the helicopter began to descend, Josh felt a slight nausea. Everything looked too perfect. Snow-white sand, turquoise water, sprawling palm trees. A perfect picture from an advertising brochure. Kelly sat next to me, looking down with interest. She looked excited, like a child seeing the ocean for the first time. God, look at that, she murmured. Josh nodded silently. The doubts that had been nesting in him since she'd suggested this trip hadn't disappeared. Quite the opposite. When the helicopter landed softly on the wooden platform, they were already waiting. A tall, well-built man in a light linen shirt stood at the edge of the landing pad. Tanned, well-groomed, with a perfect smile. "Welcome," he said with a slight accent, extending his hand first to Kelly and then to Josh. "My name is Raphael. I'll be your personal assistant during your vacation." His handshake was firm, confident. "Thank you," Kelly replied, holding his gaze a little longer than she should have. Josh noticed it. Raphael gestured for them to follow him. "Your luggage has already been delivered to your villa. I'm sure you'll like it here. The island is designed for absolute comfort. No worries, no obligations. Just pleasure." He said the last words in a way that sent a chill down Josh's spine. They walked across the wooden bridge that led to the main part of the resort. Everything looked exquisite, expensive. Bungalows with thatched roofs, pools with crystal clear water, cozy lounge areas with soft couches. But what attracted Josh's attention most of all were the people. The men and women strolling around the grounds looked relaxed, a little too relaxed. Many of them were half-naked, women in thin parios that made the outline of their bodies easy to see through, men in light shorts. These people were not just walking, they were looking at each other, smiling, touching each other. It was as if it was all part of some invisible game. Kelly didn't seem to notice anything strange. She looked around enthusiastically, breathing in the warm sea air. "This is amazing," she said as they entered the spacious villa. Everything had been done with impeccable taste. High ceilings, a huge bed, a terrace overlooking the ocean. And most importantly, the pool, secluded from prying eyes. Raphael grinned. "You can do whatever you want here." Josh sensed something subtly unsettling in his voice again. "We've arranged for you to have dinner in the main restaurant. It's a good opportunity to get to know the other guests. The island is a place where people quickly find common interests." He bowed his head slightly, looking at Kelly. Josh clenched his jaw. "Thank you," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Raphael nodded and walked away, leaving them alone. Kelly sat down on the bed and smiled contentedly. "Admit it, it's better than you expected." Josh walked slowly across the room, glancing over to the bar where bottles of expensive alcohol stood. It all seemed too elaborate. "What's wrong with that?" He looked at her. "Are you comfortable here?" Kelly shrugged her shoulders. "Yeah, sure, why wouldn't I be? You can see for yourself. It's just a resort." Josh didn't answer. Later, at dinner, his doubts only increased. The restaurant was an open area under a huge canopy. The scent of seafood and fresh lime wafted through the air. The guests were seated at long tables, laughing, drinking, looking at each other. But it was the stares that bothered Josh the most. Some couples were acting frankly. One woman ran her hand over her companion's chest right at the table, never taking her eyes off Kelly. Another couple sat so close together that it seemed like just a little more and they'd start having fun in front of everyone. Kelly didn't look shocked. On the contrary, she seemed to be enjoying the atmosphere. "See?" she said when they got back to the villa. "It's just a beautiful resort." Josh didn't say anything, but he knew that tomorrow would reveal what this island really hid. Night covered the island with a soft, moist warmth. The scent of jasmine mixed with subtle notes of expensive alcohol was in the air. Somewhere in the distance you could hear the waves splashing, but here, by the pool, there was muted music that sounded like the lazy rhythm of a beating heart. Josh stood at the bar, watching Kelly talking to two men at the edge of the pool. She laughed, tilting her head slightly to the side, letting her long hair touch his shoulder. Her movements were easy, casual. Too casual. "Something else to drink, sir?" The bartender raised an eyebrow, wiping down his glass. Josh twirled the glass with the rest of the whiskey in his fingers. Same thing. The ice tinkled as a new shot of the amber liquid slid into the glass. He shifted his gaze back to Kelly. One of her companions was of sturdy build, with close-cropped blonde hair. The other was taller, tanned, with a British accent. This one was Mark. Josh had heard of him before from other guests. Mark came to the island regularly, and if rumors were to be believed, he was a man who knew how things worked here. He was saying something to Kelly now, looking directly into her eyes. She listened intently, and then touched his forearm lightly, laughing. Josh clenched his teeth and took a sip. Relax, buddy. A warm palm rested on his shoulder. Josh turned around, and there was Raphael with the same trademark smirk. Everyone here is enjoying the moment, he continued with a wink. I see you already know what I need to say before I ask. Raphael bowed his head slightly. It's not complicated. I've seen it many times. Seen what? How men find themselves in unaccustomed situations. Josh was silent. Raphael gestured for the bartender to pour himself something, then turned back to him. The question isn't what's going on around you, Josh. The question is how you feel about it. Josh pretended he wasn't hurt by it. I'm just observing. Raphael grinned. Exactly. Josh looked toward the pool again. Mark handed Kelly a glass. She took it, took a small sip, and smiled. Then she whispered something in his ear. Josh felt something tighten in his chest. She's a very beautiful woman, Raphael said, following his gaze. And she seems to feel free here. Josh didn't respond. This was all wrong. But the problem was that there were two feelings fighting inside him. One was familiar, hard, possessive. The other, something dark, inexplicable, flowing through his body like alcohol. Jealousy and arousal. He took another sip. The music changed to something slower. A couple walked along the edge of the pool, the man with tattooed arms holding the woman by the waist. She whispered something to him, looking up at him from below. Josh felt the air around him become different. Kelly turned toward him. Their gazes met. She smiled, effortlessly, as if nothing was happening, like it was just an ordinary evening. But Josh already knew. The island was beginning to reveal its true colors. Josh felt the tension in his body reach a peak. Everything was happening too fast. The pool party, those stairs, the atmosphere, the music, the alcohol. He didn't know what was weighing on him more, the stare from Raphael, who seemed to know how it was going to end, or Mark, who hadn't moved away from Kelly. She looked different, more relaxed, confident, like she was in her usual element. Josh wanted to take her back to her room, but Kelly wouldn't leave. It's okay, she whispered in his ear, leaning toward his glass. You're just too tense. And then, after a minute, or an hour, he didn't know anymore, she said. Let's just try to play by their rules. No strings attached. Josh slowly turned his head toward her. Are you serious? She nodded, taking his hand. It's just one night. There was a ringing in her ears for a second. Wine or music? Maybe the sound of the sea? He saw a fire in her eyes he hadn't noticed in a long time. Was it desire? Or something else? No, he breathed out. But she only leaned closer. Then just trust. She didn't ask permission. She didn't talk him into it. She'd already made up her mind. And then, everything blurred. The music hummed in my ears, turning into a viscous, dragging rhythm like the beats of a pulse in my temples. Everything moved slowly, but at the same time merged into a chaotic stream of images. Someone's fingers slid over his wrist, a light touch, barely perceptible. Then laughter, muffled, stretched out as if in slow motion. He felt hot breath against his ear, but couldn't make out the words. A woman's voice? Or several at once? Bare skin slid over his shoulder, warm, soft, like sun-soaked silk. Someone pressed closer, wet lips leaving a trail on his collarbone. A hot wave swept over his body. He took a sip of something strong, but the taste didn't matter anymore. Everything was fading. Alien hands moved across his chest, down his back. Was he in the water? Yes, the water touched his thighs. Fingers traveled down his spine, lightly, barely perceptible, like a wave lapping against the shore. Dark skin, the laughter, hands gentle, sure, entwined with his. Heat piercing through consciousness. Alien lips on his throat. Bodies close, too close. He couldn't tell who was next to him. Where's Kelly? Is she here? The music was getting louder, but the meaning of what was happening was slipping away. Another sip. Someone's fingers in his hair. Another kiss. Sand, warm, wet. Flashes. Alien faces. Alien skin. Too much wine. Too little thought. And then, failure. When Josh opened his eyes, his head was splitting. The light was too bright, the air in the room heavy. He moved and felt stickiness on his skin. Sand. A salty taste on his lips. Someone was breathing next to him. Kelly? He turned around. She was lying on her stomach, naked, sheet off. But something was wrong. She wasn't looking at him. Instead, her fingers moved quickly across the phone screen. The corners of her lips lifted in a slight smile. Josh swallowed hard. Kelly. She didn't answer right away. Yes? She looked up at him. There was no shame or embarrassment in it. Just something different. Something he hadn't expected to see. He shifted his gaze to the side. Kelly's movements were light, casual, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened last night. He propped himself up on an elbow. What time is it? Kelly didn't even look up. Almost noon. Her voice was calm, not hoarse from a sleepless night, not filled with embarrassment, just casual. Josh ran his hand over his face. I don't remember. Kelly looked up at him. What? What happened yesterday? She smiled, softly, almost fondly. It wasn't a big deal. You just had a little too much to drink. Josh took a deep breath. What do you mean a little? The memories were scrappy. Hot, tangled scenes. Other people's skin, lips, breath. Wine, music, water. It all coalesced into some dark maelstrom of sensation. But he couldn't put the picture together. Are you how? He asked. Kelly shrugged. Fine. She stood up, pulled the light dress over her head. I'm going down to the pool. You coming? He watched her tie her hair into a careless knot. Not a trace of awkwardness. Not a hint that she had the slightest regret for what had happened. He never answered, just watched as she walked out, leaving a light trail of fragrant perfume and salt behind her. The door closed softly, and the room was silent. She didn't look like a woman crossing the border for the first time. The thought lingered deeper than he'd expected. Josh ran his hand over his face, trying to gather his thoughts. The feeling of wrongness wouldn't let go. He closed his eyes, but in the darkness of his mind he flashed the disjointed images of last night, his hot breath, someone else's hands, laughter. Damn the gaps in his memory. Taking a deep breath, he stood up and slowly pulled his shirt on. The cold shower hadn't helped, and now it seemed to him that only air, only movement could clear his head. He headed downstairs. The wooden steps creaked under his footsteps as he made his way down to the lounge area. A warm breeze moved the leaves of the palm trees, filling the air with the scent of coconut, fresh lime, and sea breeze. The music came from somewhere off to the side, soft, unhurried, as if the whole island lived to its own rhythm. But Josh felt that rhythm no longer matched his own. Josh headed toward the bar, his feet automatically carrying him down the wooden stairs leading to the lounge area. The evening air was saturated with a mixture of coconut oil, fresh lime, and salty breeze. Somewhere nearby music was playing, softly, lazily, as if the island itself lived in slow motion. But something made him slow his step. A familiar voice. He recognized it immediately. Kelly was his wife. Her tone was soft, muted, but it carried a confidence he hadn't noticed before. Josh instinctively stepped to the side, hiding behind a decorative column that cast a shadow. Kelly was standing at the bar table, leaning lightly on it with her elbow. Her legs were slightly crossed, and in her hand she held a glass with a clear liquid and ice cubes. Across from her was Mark. He leaned closer, almost touching her shoulder. Josh thought he'd misheard, that the alcohol hadn't completely worn off, that his mind was playing tricks on him. But then he heard it again. I told you it would work. His chest tightened. A whisper. Relaxed, satisfied. Not drunk, not casual. Realized. Mark grinned, shaking his head, then took a sip from his glass. You were right, but I didn't realize your husband was such a dumbass. Kelly smiled and bit down a little on the edge of her straw. Josh froze. Dumbass? What exactly had gotten? Why did he feel like her words had knocked all the air out of him? What did her voice sound like? She'd been sure of it all along. Kelly hadn't experimented. She knew what she was getting into. She wasn't looking for new experiences. She had a specific man she was coming here to see. Josh stood in the shadow of the column, like a lost tourist who suddenly realized his train had left, leaving him in foreign territory. The world around him was shrinking, the sound of the waves distant and muffled, as if someone had twisted the volume of reality. He tried to find in her face even a shadow of doubt, hesitation, shame, but nothing. Her gaze was relaxed, even a little playful. She ran her finger over the rim of the glass, tilted her head slightly to the side, listening to Mark. and it didn't look like light flirting. It looked like a long love story. Somewhere inside, anger flared up. Not violent, not blind. Cold. Burning. Josh knew he had to walk away. Pretend he hadn't heard. Give himself time to think, to collect his thoughts. But it was like his feet were moving forward on their own. What are you two lovebirds talking about? His voice was steady, unshaky, confident. Kelly and Mark turned to him at the same time. There wasn't a flicker of surprise on her face. On the contrary, she looked at him as if she had been expecting this moment. Oh, hi. Kelly took a small sip and smiled as if nothing had happened. Mark was silent, but the corners of his lips twitched into a faint smirk. About us, she answered without hesitation. Something crunched in her chest. About us. He felt the blood rush to his temples. She looked at him directly. No fear, no excuses. Yes, about Mark and me. Josh exhaled briefly. He'd expected anything that she'd lie, that she'd try to get out of it, that she'd laugh and say, "You misunderstood." But no, she stood in front of him and didn't even try to pretend there wasn't a hidden meaning here. His Kelly. The Kelly he'd been with for 8 years, the one they'd built a life with together. The Kelly who was now quietly discussing them with another man. He shifted his gaze to Mark. He looked a little too relaxed, as if what was going on didn't concern him at all. "Buddy," he said finally, tilting his head to the side. "Maybe not here?" Josh grinned, not knowing why. "Oh, you're uncomfortable all of a sudden?" Kelly frowned. "Josh." "What?" He looked at her. "Are you suddenly uncomfortable too?" She sighed, setting her glass on the table. "Look, let's not make a tragedy out of this." "A tragedy?" He repeated slowly. "Josh, you agreed to this." He leaned toward her sharply. "What did I agree to?" She looked at him with an expression of mild irritation, as if he were arguing with her about where to have dinner. "A night without commitment," she reminded him, crossing her arms over her chest. "Yes," Josh nodded, feeling something uncontrollable boiling in his chest. "But not on this one." Kelly continued to look at him calmly, even with a slight curiosity, as if studying his reaction. And then she took a step closer. "Josh." Her voice became soft, almost comforting. "Do you really think I just suggested we come here?" The words hit like a bullet to the chest. She leaned toward him, her lips almost at his ear. "It wasn't an accident. I planned it all a long time ago," she whispered. He closed his eyes. Damn island. Damn experiment. Bloody night. She knew what she was getting into. She'd known from the beginning. And now that the truth was out, he had to decide what to do next. Josh lay on the bed, staring into the darkness. The night was hot on the island, but a chill raged inside him. Kelly slept beside him, her breathing even calm. It was as if nothing had changed, as if he hadn't overheard her conversation with Mark, as if last night he hadn't lost the woman he'd loved for 8 years. He wanted to hate her, but all he felt so far was emptiness. Questions swirled in his head. What now? What to do next? Pretend it never happened? Swallow it like some people do? Leave everything here on this island and try to move on? No, he wasn't that kind of person. Josh stood up, trying not to make any noise, and walked out onto the terrace. The ocean shimmered under the light of the moon, the waves lapping against the shore as if whispering something. The decision came suddenly. He was leaving. It was a lazy morning on the island. Josh walked slowly down the wooden steps to the beach where Raphael was drinking coffee behind the bar. "Good morning," he smiled, but there was something more in his gaze. Josh stepped closer. "I need a ticket back. Just for one." Raphael raised an eyebrow slightly, but didn't look surprised. You're not the first person to want to get off the island." "I'm not," Josh replied flatly. Raphael grinned. "Sure you are." He made a sign to one of the employees, and he nodded silently, walking away toward the helipad. The helicopter would be here in an hour. Josh nodded and turned around, but before he left, Raphael added, "You know what the best part is?" Josh didn't answer, but he stopped. Usually those who go off on their own come back later. Josh looked at him without hiding his contempt. "I'm not coming back." Raphael grinned, took a sip of coffee. "We'll see." Kelly awoke to the soft sound of waves. She stretched lazily, rolled over on her side, but the bed next to her was empty. "Josh." She pulled herself up, yawned, and reached for the phone on the nightstand. But instead of a screen, there was something smooth, paper-like under her fingers. Kelly frowned, picked up the sheet. Enjoy the island. Without me. She sat up abruptly. The remnants of sleep instantly evaporated. Her eyes darted to the suitcase against the wall. Open. Half empty. Josh. She jumped up and ran to the door, but she knew he wasn't here anymore. The sun was blazing outside. The sea was placid, and only somewhere in the distance on the horizon was the dot of a helicopter disappearing. Kelly slowly lowered her gaze to the note in her hands. She reread it one more time, and then one more time, but the meaning remained the same. Josh was gone. Without her. Josh sat at the kitchen table in their Chicago home, staring at the papers in front of him. Glossy surface, smooth typed lines, dry legal wording. A statement of dissolution of marriage. 2 weeks ago, he couldn't have imagined his life would take this turn. 2 weeks ago, he'd been a husband who'd planned just an unusual vacation with his wife. Now he was a man who had left her on the island where she seemed to always want to be. He didn't reply to any of her messages. The first came the morning after he left. Josh, are you serious? Then, let's talk. That's no reason to just drop everything. Then silence. But he didn't want to talk. He didn't want an explanation. He wasn't going to find out how she felt about Mark, whether it was love or just desire, whether she'd planned it from the beginning or just let the island uncover something that had been dwelling in her for a long time. It didn't matter. The fact was one thing she knew what she was walking into. And that Josh couldn't forgive. Kelly didn't get home until a week later. Josh heard the front door slam. The sound of her footsteps, so familiar, echoed down the hallway. He remained seated at the table without getting up. She walked into the kitchen, tanned, her hair a little disheveled, her gaze attentive, wary. You don't even want to talk? She asked. Josh looked at her calmly. There was nothing to talk about. She pressed her lips together and furrowed her brows. Josh. He silently pulled the file folder toward her. She didn't look down immediately, but when her gaze fell on the pages, her eyebrows twitched. Divorce. No emotion. No scandal. No lengthy clarification. She looked up. Do you really want to end like this? He nodded. Yes. She stared at him for a long moment, like she was trying to read something on his face. Maybe hope. Maybe doubt. But there wasn't any. Okay, she said quietly. She picked up a pen, sat down, and signed the papers. No scenes. No excuses. No phrases like it didn't mean anything or I didn't want to lose you. Just a final point. When she was done, she stood up, picked up the papers, and looked at him one last time. I hope you don't regret it. Josh grinned. The only thing I regret is not realizing sooner who you really were. She didn't say anything, just turned and walked out. The door closed behind her. He never heard from her again. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.